All right, so good morning. This is our webinar on making quizzes and tests in Canvas. The first thing that I want to mention is that, once again, as we always say, there is a help button all the way on the left in Canvas, the question mark, that has information for how to put in help tickets or get help immediately through the Canvas support hotline, which is 24/7. They are great for technical questions. So if there's anything that I glossed over a little bit that you need more details on, or later when you realize I need some help, somebody walking me through question banks or some of these details, give them a call. They're really great at that. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do in Canvas is I'm going to find quizzes in my various categories to the left in navigation. And as we usually are looking in Canvas, we're looking for that plus button. So I'm going to hit plus quiz, indicating I would like to make a new quiz. Now, keep in mind, you can always copy materials from one course to another. So if you already have quizzes or question banks in another course that you want to use in this course, remember that you can always copy any materials from one Canvas course to another. But in this case, I'm going to be showing how to make a brand new quiz. So I'm going to hit plus quiz. And creating a quiz has two essential steps. The first is to set the various details of the quiz, and the second is to then add the questions. So the first thing we're going to do is name our quiz. So this one we're going to call Reading Quiz. I'm then going to give some instructions to my students on what this quiz is covering, how I would like them to engage with the quiz, maybe some details such as if this is a practice quiz that they can do more than once, how many times will they be able to do it, just some different details there. Now under quiz type, I want to mention that the default is a graded quiz, but you do have the option to do what's called a practice quiz, in which case the students would take a quiz, but it wouldn't garner points in the gradebook, which is really great, again, if you want students to be practicing multiple times and engaging with the material that way. Usually people are doing a graded quiz. There is graded survey and ungraded survey. We haven't noticed a major difference in how these operate versus quiz. So I think that it's really just kind of terminology if you want to get away from the word quiz. But ungraded survey is really popular for getting feedback from students. So if you want to send them an ungraded survey and say, hey, here's some questions about how I'm doing so far, give me some feedback on the class, what's working, what's not, this is a really great way to do that. So if you're trying to get some feedback from your students, I really recommend that. I'm going to do graded quiz today. And because it is a graded quiz, it will automatically show up in my assignments. Canvas knows anything with points is an assignment. And now we have some options, such as shuffling answers and a time limit. Shuffling answers means that if this is something like a multiple choice question, the answers A, B, C, and D are going to shuffle for every single student. So for one student, the right answer might be A, but for another student, it might be C. And this can kind of discourage the sharing of information between students or cheating issues, because it's not going to be very easy for me to tell someone else as a student, hey, the answer to 1 is B, because for you, it might not be B. So just something to help make everybody's quiz look a little bit different. Notice it does not say shuffle questions here. That setting is somewhere else, and I will be showing you that, so just keep that in mind. And then we do encourage using a time limit. A time limit can help prevent students from looking up answers on Google. You know, they might have time to look up 1 or 2, but if it's a reasonable time limit, they probably won't have time to look up everything. A time limit can also just help them keep in mind how long it should take them to do this. Even if it's a practice quiz, I set at least some kind of time limit so that they're not just sitting in Canvas with it open forever. But in those cases, if it's a practice, the time limit is really, really big, because obviously I want them to engage fully with the practice quiz, and it's not really intended to be timing them in that sense. Now I can allow multiple attempts. Again, if this is a practice, or if you still want it to be a graded quiz, but you want students to have more than one opportunity, you could say keep the highest grade, the most recent grade, or an average of all grades. I think highest is probably the most popular that I've seen faculty using. Whatever students score the highest is what they'll keep. And then you can say how many attempts you're allowing. So I can say you get up to 3 tries, and I'm going to keep the highest grade out of all of them. Now this setting below here also talks about when students can see the responses, such as what they got right and wrong and what the right answer actually is. And this is one of the more important settings when it comes to discouraging students from sharing information with one another. If they can't see the results until after the quiz is over for the whole class, that will prevent them from being able to say, well, I took it first and here's what I got. So the first check mark is to see their quiz responses, so whether they got the questions right or wrong. And then the other check marks also indicate students seeing the correct answer. So the first check mark is they see that they got question 3, for example, wrong, but the second check mark is, and they see that 3 was wrong and the correct answer was supposed to be C, something like that. I would say that showing correct answers is something that if you're going to do this, I would make sure that you're only showing them after the due date for the quiz has passed. Again, this way students won't be able to share correct answers with one another. If you do leave this entirely unchecked, as in you're not letting students see what they got right or wrong at all, that certainly will minimize even more students sharing with one another. However, if you do this, students will only see their collective grade. So for example, I'll see that I got an 80, but I don't know what I got right or wrong. And if the purpose of a quiz in some ways is for me to learn from my mistakes and move forward and get the correct information, what it means is if I keep this checkbox unchecked as a teacher, I need to make some time, either in a WebEx or in an announcement or in some other fashion, to release the answers to my students and talk with them about it so they still get that feedback, even if it's after the quiz is completely over. So just be aware if you keep this unchecked, you'll need to think of an alternative way to tell students what their right or wrong answers were. You could maybe release an answer key after everybody is finished or something like that. But essentially, what a lot of people do is allow students to see right or wrong and then not necessarily the correct answer, and they go over them together as a class. And then this setting says show one question at a time. Canvas either shows all the questions at once, or if you check this box, it will be one question at a time. I would say if you have a smaller or shorter quiz, having the whole quiz at once is not a big deal. If you have a longer quiz, showing one question at a time can help students focus at just that one question, and that way they won't miss any. It's up to you, but this setting is there. There are some quiz restrictions. We don't recommend using either of these at this time. Requiring an access code usually means that some student will forget the password and you'll end up with a lot of emails asking for that password. But if that's something you want to do, that would be what this setting does. And then filtering IP addresses is usually to ensure students are taking the test from a specific room on campus. Obviously, we're not on campus at this time. Similar with an access code, it's usually something that faculty are giving out once students enter a particular room to prevent students from taking a quiz at home when they want students to take the Canvas quiz in a classroom. We're not doing that these days, so I don't think either of these settings are really going to be useful right now with online classes, but I just wanted to explain what they do. And then, of course, we can assign our due date. So the due date is when we expect this quiz to be done by. But for quizzes, the availability dates are pretty important because availability dates set when you want students to be allowed to start the quiz and when you want students to be allowed to finish the quiz. So for example, in this particular case, I'm saying they can start it March 30th, but they have to finish it by March 31st. So those are the only dates in between these two times that the student can access and take the quiz. Now, once they start the quiz, that's when the 10-minute mark starts. So you don't have to have accessibility be the 10 minutes because this is when they can start the quiz. Once they've started the quiz, the time limit is then going to kick in. And then, of course, I've allowed multiple attempts. So if they do all 3 attempts on day 1, then that's going to close for them, even if the quiz is still open. But this is essentially controlling when students can access the quiz. Now, once I've done all this, I could go ahead and save what I've already done. Or if I'm ready to put in my questions, I can scroll back up to the top, and there's that second tab for questions. And this is where we add in the questions of our quiz. So details is sort of the shell of the quiz, controlling how the quiz is going to behave, and questions is where we actually populate the questions in. Now, I want to point out 2 things. Number 1, Details, as you remember, did not have a shuffle questions option. We're going to show that here. And you'll notice it still says it's worth 0 points, and that in details there was no box for how many points the quiz is worth. And that's because the points are going to be determined by how many points per question are added up to a total. So just be aware that that is how you control how many points a quiz is worth. If I'm creating a brand new question, I'm going to hit plus new question. I'm going to have a box open up. And at the top, there's a drop-down menu of all the different question types. We've got multiple choice, true, false, fill in the blank, matching, essay, a lot of different options in here. Most of these can grade themselves. Multiple choice, for example, has a designated correct answer. Matching has designated correct answers. So these question types will grade themselves automatically as soon as the student turns in the quiz. Essay, of course, does not have a single correct answer, and therefore essay will need to be graded by you, the faculty member. But if you have a combination of multiple choice and an essay at the end, Canvas will grade the multiple choice and leave the essay for you. Notice there's also a box up here on how many points this quiz is worth. So far, how much this question is worth, excuse me, how many points this single question is worth. And once I've made enough questions, it's going to tell me how many points have added up. So if I want this every multiple choice question to be worth 2 points, I need to make sure I put 2 in each of these. Or if I'm okay with the default will be 1. The very first box where it says question is actually to title your question. Just be aware that this title is invisible to the students. This is essentially for you, the faculty, so that when you go into your question banks, if you're looking for a specific question, you can remember what that question is called. So I do recommend titling your questions and not just calling them question 1, question 2, because then when you go into your question banks later, it's really very confusing to have 5 different versions of question 1 from all 5 of my quizzes. So I do recommend titling them. Again, it's not visible to students. Now below that, we have the field to actually enter our question. And notice that we can format it, we can actually add images, so your question can have a lot of different settings to it. But essentially, if this was a syllabus quiz, I might ask, when does our class meet? And then below that, I can enter my various answers. Now, because I said I would shuffle my questions, it actually doesn't matter extensively what order I'm putting these in. So it's going to ask me to put the correct answer in first and then the various detractors. If you do not shuffle answers, then you need to be cautious on what order you're entering your correct answer, because obviously you don't want the correct answer to be A for the entire quiz. And if I wanted to change that, I could click the little arrow to indicate which one is actually correct. So I'm going to say the correct answer is 9 a.m. and the other possible answers are something like 30 a.m., 9 p.m., or 12 noon. Now, once I'm done editing, it's very important that you click Update Question. One of the quirks of Canvas is if you were to do this and then click Save at the bottom, it actually would not save your question because you did not hit Update Question. So just be aware this button is very important, or you will not be saving the questions you've made. I've had that quirk burn me a couple times, so just a heads up to everyone. I also want to mention that there are some boxes down here, and you can actually create feedback per question. So for example, if students got the question wrong, the red box, if I were to click here, I could say something like, see syllabus. So if students get this question wrong, they know, oh, the answer is in the syllabus, and you're retaking this quiz, so maybe go check the syllabus for the right answer and come back and take the quiz again. Once I've updated the question, I see the box representing that question. I can hit the pencil to edit it at any time. It's worth 1 point, and you notice that now my quiz is worth 1 point. So again, it's going to add up the total points of all my questions. Now we mentioned that you can shuffle questions but that setting was not in the first details area of the quiz. So to shuffle our questions, we need to do what's called making a question group. When I make a question group, I'm basically clustering questions together for the purpose of shuffling them and for organizing them. So when I make a new question group, perhaps these questions are all related to the syllabus, I'm going to tell it how many questions I want it to pick out of the entire group. So if I have 5 syllabus questions and I tell it to pick 5, it means it will use all the questions. If I told it to pick 5, but I wrote 10 syllabus questions, it would actually randomly pick 5 out of the 10. This is another way to help randomize your tests between students. You can write more questions than the quiz has and have your question groups only pick some of them randomly. So it's another way to kind of make everyone's look a little different. And if I want the point value to be different for each one, I can actually already here say, go ahead and give 3 points per question rather than me putting it individually. Once I create the group, I can drag and drop my question that I already made into the group. I know it's now in the group because I have a box that is surrounding my smaller question box. It's a box within a box, essentially. And I can either keep making questions and dragging and dropping them into the box, or if I use this very small plus within the question group, I can add a question directly within it that way. It's just up to you what you find easier. That is how question groups work. All of the questions inside of this are going to automatically shuffle. And again, I've told it to pick 5 questions. Now, I've only put 2 in here, so currently Canvas is a little mad because it's saying, hey, you said pick 5 questions, but you didn't actually write 5 questions yet. So if you're going to tell it to pick 5, you must create at least 5. But again, if you create more than 5, it will then randomly select 5 out of that grouping. Now, some of you might have the benefit of already having question banks built or provided to you. For example, if you work with a particular publisher, they may have already given you question banks to pull from to create your quizzes. And to do that, you can click Find Questions. So when I click on Find Questions, it's going to connect to my question banks. I don't have any currently from any publishers or anything, but if I had pulled them in, they would be sitting here on the left. And I would be able to then find and add questions from those banks. Again, typically that's something that you're getting from a publisher. If you need help with that, I would highly recommend calling Canvas. The reason I recommend that is because every publisher's questions import in just a slightly different way. And so calling Canvas directly and saying, how do I pull in from this publisher, I think is going to be the best way to make sure that that's coming in correctly. All right. So far, this is what my quiz looks like. Once I am done, if I'm still working on creating my quiz, I can hit save, or if the quiz is actually ready, I can hit save and publish. I'm going to quickly change this so it's not mad at me. Let's take 2 questions. And the students can see all of the different settings that I put in, such as how many points it's worth. I have 2 questions worth 3 points each, so that makes it 6 points. There's no way for me to override this, so if you were hoping, oh, I want to have 5 questions, but I want it to be worth 6 points, well, to do that, you would have to have 1 question be worth 2 points or finagle it that way. So there's no way to make 7 questions be the same point value into 10 points unless you got really specific with decimals. I will say Canvas can accept half points if that helps you, but I wouldn't do decimals other than half points because then you're getting really specific and mathematically having it add up perfectly to an even number gets a little trickier. But if you want to use half points, those work pretty well in Canvas, I have to say. You would simply put 1.5 or 0.5. Showing the students the different settings as well as what time these are available. Now, if I want to check out what my quiz looks like, I can hit preview. And this is what my quiz currently looks like. I'm able to answer the question. And practice submitting the quiz. It's told me correct answers are hidden. so I don't know if I got this one right. And then of course it's waiting on the faculty member to actually grade the essay. Now, because I added an essay, I do have to grade that myself. So I want to mention that to do that, you would go to the Speedgrader. The Speedgrader is what we use to edit assignments, and this is true for quizzes as well. It's also a really good way to see individual student results. So if you want to be able to see what each student answered and take a look at things, that would be a way to do that as well. I haven't had any real students take this quiz, so nothing is showing here at this time, but if this was a real quiz with real students and an essay, the essay would appear here and I would be able to add the grade for it and leave comments. So that's how you grade the parts of a quiz that are not self-grading, such as an essay. If you have students that have an accommodation, if you click moderate this quiz, you'll see the various students. There's a small pencil to the right of each student's name, and that allows you to provide extra attempts or extra time on every attempt. I know that these are very common accommodations for students with disabilities, so if you have a student who has that, this is where you would do that. And again, if in the future you go to set this and you've forgotten where the button is, you can always call Canvas, and they will always let you know where that is. I know I keep repeating that, but again, the help is just so fabulous, I can't help but point it out. So those are all the various elements of creating a quiz. The last thing we want to talk about is the respondus lockdown browser. It is something you have to enable in your navigation to the left. So to enable the lockdown browser, when you click on settings, the tab at the top, navigation. If you go below, in this course it's already enabled, but if it wasn't, it would be below in your disabled items. And if you enable it, you'll then see it there, the lockdown browser. I will mention that the lockdown browser used to be really popular. These days, most students have a smartphone. The purpose of the lockdown browser is to lock the student's screen so that they can't go to the top, open a new tab, and go Google the answers. But again, now that most people have a smartphone or multiple devices in their home, I find that the lockdown browser is a little bit less functional than it was when it was invented. However, I still think that it's useful, especially if you're doing essay, to make sure students can't copy and paste things. So there's definitely still a lot of utility with that. And if I were to go to lockdown browser, it would ask me which quizzes I would like to enable it for. So for example, I may not bother with my practice quizzes, but I might make sure that my lockdown browser is enabled for my tests.